So I just made a comment not long ago on my brainstorm, big water brainstorm video about language and about shapes and drawings, as being language, and it's what we're all interested in. When I say we're all. I guess I don't really even know what that means when I say we. But like, in the last few years, I wouldn't even say it's like, I don't know, they say love is crazy and love is blind and all that kind of thing. But I have fallen in love, in a way of speaking, with shape. And there's a couple things I'm interested in. One is the way that shape is, like shape itself, like the thing in itself, the shape. What is it in reality, like real reality? What is that shape? And a lot of my videos, including the Big Water Brainstorm video, is trying to speak to that. It's trying to answer the question, even if it's a bad answer. It's trying to come to an answer of what is shape. Because at the beginning and the end of the day, really, there's one shape, which is everything. So there's that, which is essentially everything: God, the universe, the cosmos, space and time, yada yada. Then on the other end of that is how we, or how one, or how some come to shape. And maybe the rules are different in different places, how beings come to shape. And there's so much interest in architecture, and there's so much interest in, especially, there's so many different lines of thought out there. And one of the big ones is, the architecture of the past, the art of the past. But I'm always hampered by the warning or the command of the castellated Juan Matus, who said, stay away from these archaeological sites. Do not go there. And yet, there's so much structure and power there. And I'm tempted by all these structures. But then I'm also, because Castaneda had such a personal resonance with me, I'm so curious. I wonder, what greater truth, what greater geometry, math, structure, what greater thing exists that it is good above good? And there's all this beyond good and evil stuff, which drives me absolutely crazy. because there's two types of good and there's two types of evil. And beyond good and evil is beyond a certain type of good and beyond a certain type of evil. And it is the fulfillment of a certain type of good and the admonishment of a certain type of evil. But I wonder what structure is so great, because these edifices are really remarkable, and in comparison to my own everyday understanding, they're remarkable and they're awesome. But there is an awesomeness that exists at a higher degree above them, and I'm just so curious if we're to pursue these archaeologies, these structures, these forms, these geometries, what do we forfeit in not understanding, pursuing, perceiving, promoting a greater, higher order? And it is the highest order that we are compelled to seek, to understand, to overstand, to stand with. But anyway, that aside, having that said, if we seek that higher order, and if we were to attain that higher order, what would that lower order, which the Castanedian Matus says not to pursue, from our lesser standing, from a greater standing, what would that look like? So there's a geometry and an order that we're compelled by Matus not to pursue, as we are in pursuance of a higher order. So we're to presume that we're at a lesser stance from both of these orders. There's a higher imperfect order and a higher perfect order. And from our lesser state, we are to peer to one and not the other. But if we were to reach that higher state, then we could look down upon the medium order and see its order. But we can't from where we are, presumably because we're not in the center. Our lesser understanding is lateral to that other beautiful standing that is beautiful in a way, but shy and incomplete. Anyway, to make a long story long, so there's two things. There's the order as it is, and I'm not even saying like so much of like this type of order is what we see out there as being described as order, but that may not be order. That may not have anything to do with anything. It really might not. But it is important. It's extremely important insofar as the other question I have is how we, ones like me, like us, have come to the order that we've come to. Because there's the order as it is, and then there's how we've come to order. And they may be of different types, but they're related. And my interest, because for instance, this is more Cartesian. This is circles drawn Cartesianally in a perpendicularity, a Cartesian grid, which requires the x and y perpendicular axis. Whereas this, I have drawn an axis, though it's in pencil, so it's more faint. But it's a circle separated into 6s instead of 8s and 4s. Though this circle is also, separated into 12s, but Cartesian. And there's a different way to separate circles into 12s. And this one is 6s, and what's so important about this pattern, and it comes up over and over again, and it's not the be-all end-all, but it is pretty much the most fundamental structure. And the reason for that, like, we think now so Cartesianally, we think now so squarely. We think so much now in grids, graph paper, Excel spreadsheets. But that's now. That's after whenever, the whole Cartesian deal. Not to say that Descartes was even the beginning of Cartesianism, but we think so much of X, Y, and Z and perpendicularity. And lines. And lines we think of perpendicularly. But as far as beginning a cosmology, not from the standpoint of the center of the cosmos or the center of the order or God or eternity, but from the center of what we have at hand. And I've talked about it before, but basically this structure is the fundamental structure where knowledge begins. And I say that because basically it has to do with sticks. There are no flat, there are no rulers at our disposal, or lines at our disposal, two-dimensionally. But sticks are in abundance. This is a year-old pussy willow branch that I've had sitting in a bottle of water for basically a year now, a little over a year. And I just plucked it out today. It was redundant. It's, the usefulness of the water had long worn off. But anyway, so here you have a stick. You have these shapes. I find this a very pleasing shape, as it is. So it hurts me a bit to do what I must do, but for science and knowledge. So there's 4 branches here, and if I pluck off 2, essentially I have a compass. So irrespective of distance or whatever, I can begin making these circles. And all I have to do to make this grid is make a circle, and then put my point on another one, make a circle, and where those circles meet, make circles, and so on and so forth. And I come up with this grid without having a movable axis, without being able to adjust the size. Basically, this grid is where it's at. And so, just continue making these circles. And it builds itself in this perfect pattern. And it's the first thing that really can give us a straight line or a ruler. Like the arbitrary circle. Not that this is an arbitrary shape, but, coming from where we are, it's arbitrary. We can begin to rule everything. Rule measure. And begin to understand, and that's where we come from. And that's more fundamental than a straight line. So in a certain sense, on a plane, and I always think of it as sticks in the sand. You could have a very large stick, be on a beach. Not that people would be on a beach or in a desert or wherever, but that's pretty fundamental. And then coming back to sticks also, which is related but a little different. There was no paper. There was the ground, and there were sticks. So languages built from notches and sticks seem to be probably more where language came from, versus like everything always seems to go back to the Coptic and so on. But Coptic must be rather late, because we would have had to have been very advanced in some sense to be able to live in that type of environment in the first place. So making pads of clay and scratches in clay and so on, I would imagine that's really actually very late. But I don't know, because it's, the anthropological, archaeological story changes, and it's changed several times in my lifetime, and it's in a multitude of changes now, and the stories are just so haphazard and all over the place as to, where we actually came from and so on. Never mind, the mythologies. I envision somewhere, someone knows. Like somewhere in some hauled off bunker, there's some dude who knows it all. But for the rest of us, it's this adventure of discovery. And we don't know. And so we have to figure it out. And it ain't easy. The other thing, so there's languages carved on sticks. There's basically, I don't know what it's called, the six-fold hexagram, Eisensteinian grid, which seems to be a fundamental component of discovery. There's things as they are. There's stick notch languages, and then lines. Lines are vines. It seems as though in the natural world, of course this is kind of a crummy straight line, but it does speak to structure. And maybe in our natural state, whatever that is, we would just see what this structure is. Instead of it looking random or chaotic, we'd see it. I don't. But it seems as though vines and like spider webs, maybe silk webs, inchworms. I have a video somewhere of an inchworm hanging from a pine tree, and it must be hanging from it's like 100 feet. The branch was so high up, and it was like swinging right in front of my face. It's like a mile long piece of silk or whatever it is little green inchworms spin. But like inchworms and spiders, silks, those are like pretty much the straightest lines besides horizon lines or like puddles on a plane, which are pretty much inaccessible. So it's just funny that like circles, and of course there's bubbles, so spheres, but there's rarely shy of like soap or some sort of synthetic object. There's rarely pure bubbles, pure spheres. It's usually a bubble on a surface, which involves surface tension and all that kind of thing. But yeah, straight lines tend to be, spider webs, and worm silks, which are three-dimensional objects. They're one-dimensional objects in three dimensions. I don't know exactly where I'm going with all of this, except that I thought that it was important to note that, there's all this stuff with computers, and there's all this stuff with like everything with math and all this, and at the end of the day, or at the beginning of the day, like where it all came from. And it's so incomprehensible. It's such a simple thing. But just making these simple little circles over and over and over again. It's like the beginning of structure as we know it. So then the question is, how do we understand it? And if it's not the ultimate structure, how do we transcend it? And then as far as that goes, same with this, similar but different structure. You never see this pattern. It's like, but Cartesianism is like huge. It's everything. I mean, like, the entire fucking world is just built on Cartesianism. And like squares and circles, I mean, squares, circles, and triangles, like, you gotta deal with them. They're the first thing. It's like squares, circles, triangles, tetrahedron, spheres, I mean, lines. It's like, you gotta deal with them. And like this image, I mean, I guess I've seen it, but not a lot. And it's like, I wouldn't say it's the fundamental image, because this is pretty much the fundamental image, but I wouldn't say this is even a close second, but as far as the Enlightenment goes, as far as like post-1600 goes, like, this is a fundamental image. And we never see it. And it's so simple to build, but I find it completely confounding. 99 out of 100 people, I think, wouldn't know how to build it unless I actually am the dumbest person in the world in some sort of Vonnegut Slaughterhouse-5 scenario, which I'm beginning to suspect. But shy of that, 99 out of 100 people aren't exposed to this, and it's not because they're stupid. It's, I don't know what it is, but even if this is wrong, and even if this is wrong, and even if the elements, the structures that the castanedated Matthews tells us to stay away from, it's not so that we can languish in stupidity. It's not so that we can languish in some turpid lukewarmism of not knowing, or in some H.G. Wells anti-heroic dystopianism. It's so that we can aspire to even a greater order. And I'm not telling anybody that they should be doing something. Now that we have a lot of this information at hand, it just seems so important. If we all knew this stuff, if this was part of our cultural currency, our cultural language, the way we speak about things, the way we think about things, shape and distance and direction, and so on, the world would be a better place, not only because we'd have an expanded literacy, an expanded language, but because we'd understand better the order of things as they are, the order of things as they were, the order of things as they could be, and the order that reaches from one thing to another, from the beginning to the end, in the order that is sown between one end and the next. And somehow, even those just ridiculous preschool spinning sticks, it has everything to do with everything. It has everything to do with love and God and existence and the cosmos and everything else. Math and language, sound, light, space, time, everything. And I know I'm preaching to the choir. I'm preaching to the preachers. You know, I'm in Sunday school, banging on the ceiling, preaching to the converted with lesser lessons than what my betters teach. But that's where I'm at. Gotta start somewhere.